Thank you, Chairman Graham and Ranking Member Whitehouse. Thank you both for your persistent, effective, engaged work on cybersecurity, and in particular in advance of the 2018 elections. It's terrific to see this bipartisan work, and I want to commend Senator Klobuchar and Senator Langford for their hard work on the Secure Elections Act and the ways in which they've worked to make sure that we're making progress on this. Mr. Klasky, if I could just continue. She opened, and I'd like to extend an invitation to you to be more specific about what you think are the greatest vulnerabilities we face in the 2018 election, and if you don't mind recommending, what are the most useful ways that $380 million, where Senator Klobuchar led the authorizing effort and a number of us supported the appropriating effort, what are the most effective ways that states can and should be spending that funding?
So a lot of what we see as the biggest vulnerabilities are around election management systems, which are IT systems that share some of the characteristics with other aspects of state and local infrastructure elsewhere. We've worked with states and counties around the country to do risk and vulnerability assessments of these of election infrastructure, including election management systems, and we've seen some common vulnerabilities, a lot of which can be covered through cybersecurity best practices, from general execution, from knowing what equipment you have, educating around things like to avoid spear phishing campaigns, identity management, access control things. And, I think state governments, as we've seen it, generally have the capacity and have taken that stuff seriously and have begun to bake that into their operations. Once you get down to county and local governments, some of which are attached to those systems, that's where you have some additional vulnerabilities. And so it is getting to the last mile that matters a lot. We have a project that we're doing with our partners where we've actually done contextually specific cyber vulnerability mitigation guidance in the form of posters, simple posters that are intended for down to the county level, that are customized for county IT operators so that they can put that in place. I think you can get to a lot of cyber defenses around election management systems in really good IT practices. That's what we're seeing. That's what we're trying to proliferate. The other range of vulnerabilities is something that's inherent in a lot of the questions you've asked earlier, which is it may not be that they actually interfere with the actual process. They interfere with the confusion around the process. There's confusion who's registered. There's confusion of whether what's reported in the news is the accurate voting count. And that's exercises. That's being prepared for that. As you all know better than I do as elected officials, what gets reported on Election Day is not the validated vote count. That gets certified. But we have to be prepared for chaos in that situation. We have to build out the incident response plans, both at the national level, but then working with state and locals. And we have to exercise the fact that something could go wrong without letting everything that might go wrong be seen as a national crisis. We have to be resilient in how we're doing it. That's the kind of ideas we put out there. We've actually pushed this idea of a cybersecurity navigator to use some funds to actually hire somebody who can help you implement this consistently. Illinois has done that. So I think there are good models out there to follow.
Thank you for your answer and your hard work on this. Let me reference two bills. Senator Whitehouse ably summarized the challenges we face in having multiple agencies and entities, but frankly also multiple committees here in Congress. Virtually every permanent committee of the Senate claims or has actual jurisdiction over cybersecurity issues. I mean, literally from banking and finance to intelligence to judiciary to foreign relations. Senator Gardner and I have introduced a resolution calling for a new permanent select committee on cybersecurity to be made up of the chair and ranking of all of the relevant committees, because frankly, our fractured jurisdiction is one of our challenges. We're also considering a bill that would allow the president, acting through the Secretary of State, to designate critical cyber threat actors, which would enhance sanctions on those who support state-sponsored cyber attacks, including critical infrastructure and election systems. I'd be interested if all three of you would just briefly say if you think that targeted financial, property, and travel sanctions on our adversaries who are directly involved in sponsoring cyber attacks might help deter future attacks on our critical infrastructure.
Well, Senator Coons, I think we would wholeheartedly agree with that point. And as you probably know, the Treasury Department has imposed sanctions on a number of individuals. So the Justice Department has proceeded against criminally, including the individuals from the Mabna Institute, the Iranian hackers that were mentioned in the statement earlier. Many of the Russians who were indicted earlier this year for election interference have been sanctioned. So I completely agree with you that used appropriately, sanctions can be a very effective tool.
Mr. Moss.
Senator, these states are using cyber operations as a low-cost tool of statecraft. We believe they will work to use these cyber operations to achieve their strategic outcomes unless they face clear repercussions for their cyber operations.
Thank you, Mr. Klasky.
Yeah, I would agree, and let me reference, question reference to Mr. Fanning, who I think is probably still behind me. We do work so regularly with Mr. Fanning, Tom, and his team. He knows us well, we know each other. And one thing I would add to that is one of the things that the private sector is asking, and one of the value propositions the government brings, is when they're under attack, when they're being hit, come to us, help us explain with the expectation that the government will take action. So I think things like sanctions will just strengthen the relationship between the public-private partnership and the information sharing because they'll know that the government's got their back.
Let me ask you a last quick question, if I might. The NDAA authorized DOD to engage in proportional cyber operations in response to cyber attacks. Is DHS seeking, or does it have any similar pre-authorization to respond to a foreign cyber attack? Senator Whitehouse referenced hackbacks. I was wondering if DHS has or is seeking that authorization.
No, I think we would be part of the process with the Department of Defense and part of the decision-making process in making sure that we understand what they're doing and how it may sort of propagate into other things. But we're not offensive. We have the authorities we need to help with network defense and to support network defense. We rely on our partners across the interagency and other authorities. But what we want to hope is that we can connect what's going wrong with action to make sure that it's less likely that we're going to be attacked.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.